welcome to episode 27 of Attention Engineer. I'm Laura Kidd, a music producer and solo artist making music as Penfriend and beaming into your ears from my home studio, The Launchpad, in Bristol. In a noisy online world, the gift of someone's attention is priceless, so thank you for joining me on my mission to inspire creativity in every listener through having the conversations I've always hoped for with some of the artists I admire the most. This is the last episode of this podcast before I wrap up for the year, and I'm ready for a break. It's been quite a year, hasn't it? And I think we can be excused for looking forward with eager anticipation for brighter days. Come on, 2021. Thank you so much to everyone who's been supporting my latest single release, Let It Snow, 100% not a Christmas song. Not that there's anything wrong with those, this just isn't one. This is the first release of my Obey Robots collaboration with Rat from Ned's Atomic Dustbin, who was my guest on the podcast last week. The limited edition pink vinyl double A-side singles and shiny CDs are available to pre-order now, and you're welcome to download the digital version of the song on a pay-what-you-want/can basis as well. Just head to penfriend.rocks, click on songs, and it's all right there for you. Enjoy! Robin Ince is many things. A comedian, an author, a broadcaster, and a populariser of scientific ideas. The Guardian once declared him a becardiganed polymath, which seems about right. He's probably best known as the co-host of the Sony Gold Award-winning BBC Radio 4 series The Infinite Monkey Cage with Professor Brian Cox. He also co-hosts the podcast Robin and Josie's Book Shambles, which gains over 100,000 listeners a month and is part of the Cosmic Shambles Network, which he also co-created. Robin has created, curated, pioneered and hosted numerous nights mixing science, music and comedy at some of the most celebrated venues around the world. His brainchild, 9 Lessons and Carols for Curious People, continues to sell out theatres every year, over a decade after its first appearance. And in 2019, he embarked on a world tour of arenas with Professor Brian Cox. I'm so happy to share my conversation with Robin with you today. Robin and I met online a few years ago when he found my stargazing video on YouTube and tweeted about it. Several friendly chats later, I met up with him at the Slapstick Festival in Bristol to watch The Great Dictator, and after that he started inviting me to perform at all sorts of wonderful events at venues like the Royal Albert Hall and Hammersmith Apollo. Last year we spent a month on tour together around the UK, and it was one of the best tours of my life so far. One of the main drivers for making this podcast is to invite music fans and patrons of the arts into the real world of creative people, to show some of the mechanics of what we do, while appreciating the magic that none of us can explain. It's a friendly reminder that creativity is available to all humans in all sorts of ways, and that we all doubt ourselves and find things difficult, but that for some reason, the urge to keep making things can keep us going. I was particularly interested in asking Robin about how he organises his time across so many projects, how he handles his inner critic, and, as someone who's been performing on stage for 30 years, how he's been dealing with staying home this year. I think this is the perfect episode to end the year on. Here we go.
Is the sound all right for you?
Sounds great, thank you. Yeah, very good. It's almost like you do this for a living, Robin. How many conversations have you had with people this year?
I don't know. I've realised that interviews for the book alone, I have over 1 million words.
Whoa.
Just from interviews for the book. And of course, now I would say 70% of those people are not in the book. So it's just me going, I've got to be able to keep some Neil Gaiman and Brian Eno in, but they were not specific enough because, and then there's this huge number of interviews that I did where at the first, when I started writing the second version of this book in April, when I started again, I thought it was about something else.
Right.
So I listened back to these interviews and go, the fuck are you asking that for? Oh, because it was about something else then. That's why.
Are you able to speak about what the book's about on this, or is it a secret?
Oh, yeah, I can say anything about it. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, so what was the book about and what's it about now?
Well, I think it was more about finding meaning in science and about the absurdity of existence and all of these kind of things. And it's actually ended up being, even though I suppose this is still connected to meaning to some extent, it ends up being about how all of the ideas are connected. That once you start looking from the perspective of scientific reality at the universe, which sometimes people can find quite kind of disconcerting and alienating and unsettling, that actually it's if you look at it for a bit longer, like with those first moments when I was on tour with Brian Cox, and there'd be that, he'd suddenly talk about the size of the universe or whatever, and you can see that some people go, oh, it's too big. Yeah. It's just, I'm lost now. Yeah. And I think if you keep looking at the idea for a bit longer, then you get to the next stage more often than not. But you have to look for a while. And then interestingly, some of the people, do you know Katie Mack?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Katie's great, and her book End of Everything, which is all about the different ideas of how the universe will end. She's quite interesting because most physicists I know are pretty blasé about the end of existence and indeed the end of themselves, whereas she does have a level of existential anxiety, which I found quite interesting. And so she said, I'm not entirely sure it's helped writing a book about all the different ways the universe is going to end.
That's fair enough. That is absolutely fair enough. Yeah. It is such a big subject. But see, interesting. I think this is interesting. So I was trying to think of what we could talk about, because we can talk about anything, and we have done in a car for many hours. But I was trying to think of something that would be really interesting and useful to the listeners because of the angle that I'm going for with this podcast, which is about trying to inspire creativity in everyone, whatever that means. So day to day, someone who doesn't think they're creative but would like to do something one day, how would they go about starting? So given that you're someone who does so many things and so many big projects, certainly from the outside, it can look just overwhelming, and how on earth does that one man do so much stuff? To the point where actually I talked to Beck Hill a few months ago for this, and I asked her if she had a question for you, and she did. So let me find it on my phone and play it to you. And that sets us up quite nicely for it, because she sums it up really well. So have a listen to this and tell me what
Hello, Robin. You probably get this a lot, but you achieve a lot. You work really hard, to the point that I'm not entirely sure how you do that without bending time somehow. So what would a typical day for you be? Just like an average working day from waking up to going to bed. Explain your day, because I don't know how you fit everything in.
See, I always find that really interesting, those kind of things, because I consider myself to be a lazy failure, basically. I really, and also because I don't have any like you have or Beck has. You have talents, right? You have things that you could do. I think to some extent, everything that I attempt is a battle against my lack of skills. So,
right.
You can create music, and Beck creates those, fantastic animations and all manner of it. And I don't have any of those things. So I think a typical day, today, for instance, I suppose is, I did get distracted by a repeat of Dempsey and Makepeace, the early 1980s police thriller. But then I remembered I'll be able to see what happens in the end by looking on YouTube. So that saved me a lot of time. This is one of my time-saving techniques, by the way, is the +1 television channels, for instance, which is, if you are going to watch a murder thriller on ITV3, for instance, start watching it on ITV3 +1, watch the first half hour, then watch the last half hour on ITV3, and that saves you from the hour in the middle, which is generally a lot of its padding. So you can cut down a 2-hour episode of Endeavour or Morse or whatever it might be, turn it into an hour. So that's one way that I save time. But I start off by, because I don't actually have a plan, but I have a hope of what I'm going to do. So this morning I started off, I normally read a real hodgepodge of things. So this morning I'm reading a book about the philosophy of consciousness, which I find very disconcerting, and when I talk to neuroscientists, I'm not overly happy with that, but I wanted to understand it. So that's about panpsychism. And then I read an interview with Harold Pinter from the 1960s, and then I read a bit of the Fortean Times, and then I read a bit of a big book about like kind of famous thinkers and stuff like that, about the philosopher Richard Rorty. So quite often what I'll do is I have lots of scribbly notes in books, and at some point I will transcribe them and then never use them for anything else. I've got an enormous stack of folders and notebooks, all of which I've never opened again. But I wrote everything down in the hope that something will return. Then I was like, oh, right, I've got to edit the book. So I spent about 2 hours just hacking away. And then there's a certain point where I'm allowed a treat. And today's treat was listening to a selection of supposedly prog-based singles from the early 1970s, UK released, including Dana Gillespie's excellent cover version of David Bowie's Andy Warhol, which I think came out before Hunky Dory. And then I started working on writing a show, whatever I'm going to do for the next Brian Cox tour. And then immediately after this, I'm working on a documentary that I'm just making for myself with my mate Trent about the TV play Penda's Fen. So I'll do that for a while and work out. I've got some interviews that I'm kind of dealing with. So that's a kind of typical day, which is I'm very bad at sitting down and going, here is the thing. Like I think proper artists and creative people, the thing that they have is they're very good at focusing on going, this is what I'm going to do today. Whereas if you don't have any skills, my thing is, why don't I just try and do everything today and then see what's left at the end? So it's a kind of, a dirty bomb of failed creativity.
I love the way you explain things. That's brilliant. But you're talking about lots of different quite big projects that you've obviously broken down into the constituent parts of what need to be done to create that thing. So do you have somewhere in a notebook, here's all 5 massive projects and here's the next step or anything like that? Is there any kind of planning like that?
No, in fact, that's a bit like before we start recording this, we're just talking about, the book that I'm writing at the moment. It turns out is 60,000 words too long. And I was talking to some authors the other day, and a lot of them were saying, like Helen Chersky, the scientist who wrote Storm in a Teacup, like pretty much what she writes in the book, in the first draft, is the book. But I think that's because a lot of authors that I know have spent a long time working out what they're writing before they start writing. Whereas I have, as happened with my last book, I'm a Joke, and with the new one that I'm working on now, I think I know what I'm going to write, but I need to write way too much to then find out. So I think some people are able to work in a very kind of parsimonious way, whereas I have to just, as you know, with the shows that are on tour, they will always start off by being too long. And it's taken me years to actually get them to a little bit shorter. And I'm never satisfied with actually what people have seen. And that's part of the problem is if you overcreate, then whatever you ultimately deliver, you always think that the perfect bit was the bit that you didn't give to people, which is a slight problem. But it's also, it is the way that I work. So the book, which it was about 170,000 words. Eventually it should be about 95,000 words. But I had to roll this bit of kind of, dust and all these bits of lint, get them all together as a big ball and then go, actually, where's the nice thing in here?
That makes sense to me. And then I went on a fiction writing course recently, which was really interesting. And that seems to be the approach for fiction. Correct me if I'm wrong, listeners, but a lot of novelists would write like that because the first draft exists only to exist to tell yourself the story, is what I was taught. And therefore, the edit is really important in terms of telling a story through fiction because you have just had to explain it to yourself first. So are you explaining your thoughts to yourself in your first draft?
I think that's all I am is an inner monologue, which occasionally goes public. And because it is a perpetual, I mean, I think in some ways this is, it's a reflection of what goes on in my head as you know, from touring with me, it doesn't actually stop. So I don't switch off. And that means that I'm always talking to myself in my head, if not out loud. And so I think actually that kind of creative process is it is a reflection of it's a lot of it is disconnected ideas and then trying to work. And that's in fact one of the things that I love about live performance is live performance allows you to create the illusion of connection in a way that's why I find writing is kind of not necessarily harder, but it's very different because I can't, the first draft of the last book that I did, I now realise would have made absolutely no sense to anyone because it was as I think. And so if you know or anyone who had been to a lot of my shows, I think would be able to read it in my voice. There were only a couple who actually read the first draft and preferred it to the end result. But they both said, but that's because I've known you for 20 years.
Right.
And I think that's that to me, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the things that I find most interesting. If you have a live version of yourself and you are then creating something which is, in the same, when someone's listening to your music, they've downloaded it or whatever, that's very different to the way that it might be translated when you're standing on stage and I think that's quite an interesting thing of working out. How can I cut down the misinterpretation of my intentions because I'm not in the room to correct them?
Yes, that's really interesting. And when you're writing in this solitary way with no audience there, when you're writing your books, do you have to tell yourself it's okay, someone will want to read it? Do you have to convince yourself there will be an audience? Does that ever cross your mind?
I don't think about that, though. I do think about its failure. I really hope there's an audience, and what I think about is poor sales and the fact that the only person who does review it can't stand it, and then some people put some things up on Amazon that are cruel, and so those voices start almost from the moment that I come up with an idea of book. The annoying thing of anyone who says you're your own worst critic hasn't spent very much time, as we know, on the internet, and that is it, and that so I do think that's one of the. It's a strange thing, isn't it? Because I do think for a lot of creative people that I know, there is a mixture of a kind of self-loathing and obviously a kind of engorged ego as well.
Oh yeah, it's like God complex versus I'm nothing.
And it's such a weird. It's such a
in between.
To get that balance, which just goes, because I do know some people. I'm sure we both do. We know some people who are strangely balanced, but ultimately, most of them. Yeah, I think there's a couple though out of hundreds.
Because I haven't had any of them on this show yet.
No, well, again, this is a very. You've got a specific group of people who are drawn, to the. But I think, I think that's an interest. To me, it's one of the fascinating things, which is, I wanted to do a project once where someone went around and took a photo of a performer 10 seconds before they go on stage, and then the moment they get to the microphone. Because I think that transition from, it might have to be a little bit longer than 10 seconds, but that bit before you put your show face on.
Yes.
And you are still, oh, Jesus Christ, and then you hit the microphone, and that that's why people find it such an intriguing thing when they. I was amazed when I read that Nick Cave, his nerves beforehand, because of all the artists that I can think of, Nick Cave was the one that I somehow imagined could be blasé backstage.
Yeah,
but even he, and that's why. I remember chatting to Lisa Bauer, who's a really good author, and she was saying to me, she said, "But you're so confident." I said, "It's such an interesting thing when someone tells me that, because I have, all the way during a gig, although that time ago when we did gigs, but over the years it's got worse and worse. The noise of the critic, so that you can be going through a gig and you can be getting big laughs all the time." And I still can hear that. I think that some people are dissatisfied. I don't think this is good enough. I don't think this is good enough. And yet that's not what people are seeing. And I think that's one of the fascinating things in any form of public exposure versus inner monologue. That kind of, it's just,
Yeah. From what I'm learning from all the people I'm talking to for this series, everyone's feeling that all the time. And I suppose maybe to people who don't do this, just the fact of you're standing on a stage, you must be confident, because only a confident person would stand on a stage. I can see that. I can see why it would seem that way. But it seems like it's entirely the opposite to me. What do you think about the idea that your inner critic is actually what writer's block is? What do you think about that as someone who writes a lot of words?
I'm not sure if it is. I think it might be the opposite of writer's block. And I say that having not thought about that sentence at all, and it just having come out. But I kind of wonder whether it reminds me of. I remember someone quite early on telling me when I was working on a TV show and as a writer, and someone said, "We just have to put down the first jokes that come into your head, because don't allow yourself to go, that's not good enough. Because if you put out the first thing that's in your head, you then look at that page and go, Jesus Christ, I've got to write something better than that." So your drive has suddenly become that by not having any editing in the very first stage. So I think sometimes that the critic that's saying this is shit, this is a waste of time, no one's going to read it, and I think now as I'm getting closer to finishing the book, I can hear louder and louder. A louder and louder sense of its pointlessness and the lack of interest in it and all of those things.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes that might be part of the drive as well. That and it is all of that. That fail again, fail better thing. I think plays a really major part in the hope, because we always have. It's that bit, isn't it, that you hope that the daydream you had about an initial idea, that one day that sense of that dopamine hit you got from the daydream is as great when you finish making the thing or when the reaction comes.
Yeah. I've got a song coming out. It's this Friday, but when this comes out, it will have been a week and a half ago. So hopefully people will have heard it by then. But I got the mix back last night and I put it on and I played it and I was grinning all the way through. And then the last guitar crunchy sounds happened at the end and then it faded out and I was sort of grinning, and I turned to my husband Tim and I said, this is the feeling I'm always chasing when I'm making something new. And I was like, and now it's gone.
Yeah.
And hopefully I'll keep feeling that as I hear that song, because it's new, it's newly finished, it's exciting, it is exciting. But that's it. And then you're like, cool, got to make another thing now then. Because I also have this thing where, and he really hates me talking about this because he wants me to be more positive. It's not that I'm not a positive person. I'm not a pessimist. I'm just a realist, and I've been doing this for a while. So when I have a batch of new songs, which I have, ready to go out as an album, I'm really excited for the people who already like me to hear it. That's the real point of making it, really, is I know that there are going to be some people who really love it. That's really exciting. But there's also this hope that those songs might go out into the world and bring back all these new opportunities, which songs or other pieces of work, all different kinds of art, can bring you. Oh, I might be able to do a cool tour, or I might be able to do this or that or the other thing. But see, I've already decided that's probably not going to happen because it hasn't done before. So while I'm excited for the songs to go out, there's this big loud voice going, don't get too excited though, because you're just going to have to make the next batch, because whatever you think is going to happen isn't. And what is happening is really valuable, and that's the thing to focus on, which is if people enjoy it and want to get it, that is what's great, not this intangible magical thing that might happen if some random person hears it somewhere, So I have all that stuff going on as well. And when I voice that in my house, I'm met with sort of like, can't you be a bit more positive, and let's just be optimistic about this one, shall we? But I'm fine with the fact that I make something, then I make something else, and then I make something else. That's fine.
I think you need to talk it out, don't you? You need to, because the point is that once you have that mentality, you realise that even if this record led to you getting a huge tour, it's still, because I think that's one of the problems that some people who have believed that fame will be the cure for who they are.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then they become famous and they realise that unfortunately in that journey that they carried themselves all the way. They didn't leave themselves behind. They're still in their body. They're still. And so I think that, whatever level, and I fight with it all the time because, there is a point where you're kind of going, oh man, I could have sold a few more tickets in Peterborough, couldn't I? I mean, God, all these gigs and I'm still not selling well there. And, there's always those, but that bit which you have to keep saying. Do you know what? There was that person that came up to me in the bookshop and they said they'd found something in my book or in a show or whatever it might be, and it had been really important for their life.
Yeah.
And those moments are that bit, but I think it's a very active relationship. If you don't have what might be seen as, fame, a big name or whatever it might be, like as a comedian, when someone says, oh, you're a comedian, what have you been on? If you've not been on telly or you don't do much telly, then, then you can't be very successful. It's like that lovely story where, Stuart Lee, when he was having, this must have been about 10 years ago or more, but he was, Stuart was a name by then. But, when he was having an examination, a rectal examination, and as he was going, as the anaesthetic was working, he could hear the nurse saying, well, I've never heard of him. And that kind of thing is just, and so that, sometimes I think you eventually realise you will never be able to escape from those realistic or negative voices or whatever they might be.
Yeah.
But I mean, I talked to that was I just didn't realize that wasn't really on the point. But it is that bit of going, something's been useful to someone. I've seen it with your stuff. I've seen reactions.
yeah.
I've seen things that people have written on social media, and I've seen reactions to certain songs, and the importance of the meaning of something.
Yeah.
And the importance of, and that's the bit that we have as part of the job. I think the kind of thing that you do, or that Grace Petrie does, or Josie Long, and certainly what I'm aiming for as well, is that at times we are the voice of lots of people who are very quiet. And I don't mean in some big flamboyant political way. I just mean that moment where people go, "I'm not the only one."
That's such a beautiful way of putting it. That's lovely.
There was a bit where, when I was writing the last book, and I kept having in my head, this might have been after it came out, actually. It was the first kind of reactions that I got from people who had found something in it that they had never expressed themselves and had believed was there. And I kept having that moment in Rock and Roll Suicide, "Oh no, love, you're not alone," which is one of the greatest, I think, single sung lines of any song, one of the most vital, whatever Bowie thought he was singing at the time, who knows what he was on, but nevertheless, that "Oh no, love, you're not alone" was just stuck in my head. And that bit is I think one of the most important things. But it doesn't mean that then you go, "Oh, well, that's great. It's really nice that someone came to my show and it's made their life a lot better." But I'm still saying the sales in Peterborough are terrible.
To me, the marker of success is definitely those interactions. And it doesn't have to be the interaction. It's the fact that could be happening. I may or may not hear about it. I love hearing about it because it gives me the sense that more people will be having that reaction. That is the beautiful thing. But certainly in the music industry, whatever that means, whether I'm a part of that or not, I do not know. But in this world that I operate within, in some capacity, there's this idea that this magical thing will happen and you will get picked one day. And that's something that I think is very damaging, because it means that I think people's markers for success can be very pointless and spurious, and, chasing numbers of streams rather than numbers of people who say your song changed my life is pretty weird to me. But anyway, I'm just, it's interesting to sort of look at the parallels between I just think there's so much in common between different artistic output, music or comedy or whatever it is. What do you think of yourself as? When you think of Robin Ince, if you do think of Robin Ince, what is Robin Ince? What is that?
This could be the moment where from now on I only talk about myself in the third person.
I hope so.
And imagine that elevation. It's a weird, because I don't know. I've never known what I am. I've never thought that I'm a pro at anything. And that's, it's if I've been doing a benefit gig and I'm in a room with lots of famous comedians, I just think, well, I have no idea why I'm here, or not even famous necessarily. There are, most other people. So I think I've always thought of myself as getting away with it and failing and all of that, and that's true. And I don't want to. I don't say that out of any sense of demand for pity or anything like that. It is. And I think I very much see myself, which is odd considering, I come from, obviously the levels of privilege that I carry with me are, they're not Lawrence Fox level, but nevertheless, but but I carry with me that sense of always being on the outside. So I never, and my wife said that to me in the past. She said, "I don't know what it is." She said, any room you walk into, she always used to feel somehow just not quite fitting in. Whatever room I'm in, I look like I've walked into the wrong one. I should be in the one next door. And if I walk into the next door one, and I think I carry that with me a lot, which is, and I realise as well that sometimes that is, you can. So I was talking with Josie Long the other day, and we were doing Pointless Celebrities together. Yes. Ooh. So maybe it has worked out. I won't tell you about some of our excellent answers, but I will. One of them was Arundhati Roy, which did very well. But it was. We both talked that you realise that we're both in quite a niche world. Yeah, I mean, I think now as well the mainstream is a very dominant thing, and there is, I was growing up at a time where there was a counterculture which was in the mainstream culture as well, and I think every now and again you realise, oh yeah, I'm definitely marginal, very much in a marginal position. And I'm in a fortunate position where I'm allowed every now and again to go into a kind of strange mainstream, because I pop along and interrupt Brian Cox, obviously. But that's kind of like, But so I think that's what I see myself. I do see myself as it's always interesting, like going to literary festivals and stuff. And I'm always very much the person talking to, the people doing the tech and things like that, and just wandering around on my own. And not trying to get a word in with Margaret Atwood or whatever. Not that I, not much as I might like to. I think this is not my place. So I think that in one way it's useful as well. I think that sense of, and I think it's hard at the beginning. I think it gets easier when you're as old as me. I think there's a point where, it's like in some of the shows that I do now, especially if there's like kind of younger people in the audience, sometimes people bring their kids and stuff like that. And I will know that if the kids have wanted to come along, they may well be kids who aren't having that great a time at school in terms of with other people. And I try to make sure that I make some point at some time to mention the fact that school days are not the best days of your life, and that sometimes when you're growing up and when you're a teenager, you can really feel so much on the outside and you don't have a clique and anything like that. But there is a point where you then escape and you are beginning you can now mix with anyone you want, and you can find your people. And I think that I've realised has become a more and more important part of what I do as well. I mean, it's kind of reflected what we were saying before, but that bit, especially with younger people, and I think also when you're an artist and you're starting out, and I made terrible mistakes for the first. I started quite strongly and went downhill almost immediately. I was kind of, I was in a competition in Edinburgh, and I did well there. But I didn't really know what I was meant to be doing. And once I lost the initial burst of adrenaline, I started to think, well, is this what you're meant to do? Is this what you're meant to do? Is this how you're meant to do it? And certainly in the late 90s and when I was working kind of TV things and stuff like that, I think I was still very much doing, I think this is the kind of show that I should be trying to write on, because this is where you go places, and this is the kind of show I should try and get on because and then somewhere in my early 30s, I realised that I'd become entirely disconnected from the reasons that I started doing it in the first place. And so I think that's, that bit of, and so I think when you do start in any form of creativity, that bit of first getting used to failure, or alternatively realizing what was making you successful was not what you wanted to say in the first place. And I've seen that happen to quite a few people. I've seen people to get to step 3 have done what is right for the market. Right. And then 25 years later, they go, I didn't realize I'd still be on step 3 though. Right. Does that make sense? If you see what I mean. So I haven't told you how many steps there are in all. So you could have thought step 3 was the top step. There's 12. There's I can't say 12 steps because then say there's right. So there's let's say there's 8 steps. Right. So there's 8 steps. So you go, yeah. And a lot of comics I've seen that happen. Where, because when I started, I was doing well. I then had this embarrassing thing that happened to me, which was some of the clubs that booked me to do full sets, 20-minute sets, demoted me to do half sets, and then demoted me to do open spots again, which are where you work for free. So I went from being a properly paid act to actually returning to doing gigs for nothing. And that also damages you a great deal, because then you're seen as a kind of an unsafe pair of hands. So I would have to have good gigs far more often to get the same number of gigs as someone who actually wasn't doing, all of those things that came with it. And that, so that's really hard to deal with as well.
How did you deal with that? What did you do next?
I drank very heavily.
Right.
I mean, that's a sad thing. I wish that was a throwaway joke, but I've only realised recently that I wasted a lot of my time in the 90s drinking far more than I should. It's terrible, really, to waste. And my 20s were predominantly, I think, a waste. But of course, as we know, if you then move on and find things you do want to say or do or create, then it means it wasn't a waste. It was merely part of the the process of getting there. But I found it really difficult because I'd had a little moment very early on, very young, where it looked like stuff was going to happen for me, and then it all disappeared and everything went backwards. And that was kind of the whole of the 90s.
So how did you get to the point where you were then writing your own full headlining shows and doing your own thing? the way that you do now?
Well, I did that way too late. That's something I would say to anyone. In particular, I would certainly say to any comics that might listen to this, write your first show really, but think it's probably going to be shit as well. But work on an hour. Work out what you want to do for that first one. I was in my early 30s by the time I actually did that. And in fact, I mean, the one that I wrote is so obviously, and now looking back, you don't need to be any form of Freud, whether it's, Emma or Sigmund, to work out how that my first show was called The Award-winning Robin Ince, star of The Office, Series 1, Episode 5, first bit. And it was a version, because I had a small part in The Office, Series 1, Episode 5, if you haven't worked that out, and first bit. And I did this one, which was kind of a parody version of myself. It was someone who had to believe that they had an incredibly important input into the world of comedy, big name comedy. And I was surrounded in my show with Andy Warhol style images of Brian Connolly and Claudia Winkleman, and who I worked with a lot of the time. This was before she was the highest paid person at the BBC, and all these things. And it would end with me punching a melon, which I'd drawn Vernon Kay's face on, and singing Mustang Sally. And it was all about realizing that you had squandered all your time getting a fast buck writing for shit shows and doing stuff like that. And it was at that point doing that show, which was then also fortunately predominantly a failure. Though the good thing was it was predominantly a failure, except with the people who did like it all gave me jobs afterwards. So I keep getting these interesting jobs, like doing a pilot for a show about psychology for BBC 4. I said, thanks very much for asking. Why have you asked? Oh, we saw the show where you punched that melon that had Vernon Kay's face on. And I don't think the Vernon Kay melon face was the main, but that was, and now it's so overt what I was saying, which is I've squandered 12 years.
Yeah.
And then from that point, and at the same time, that Edinburgh, when I was having a really tough time, and I also back at where I lived, the basement flat I lived in had flooded with sewage, and I was doing a radio series that I hated, that I had to fly back from Edinburgh at 5 a.m. to go and record this radio series and then fly back the same day, and I hated what I was making, and my house was full of shit, and I was punching this melon, and I was then going to see all these other performers. And first of all, you find out when your show's not doing well, you find out who the people are to hang around with. And I'm sure you've had that situation where you find out the real kind of, companionship and camaraderie and all of that. And I also was going to see all of these people who were doing incredible shows, but wouldn't be able to work within the mainstream and wouldn't be able to work in mainstream comedy clubs. So that led to me starting a show called The Book Club, which was kind of me putting together lots of weird and generally idiosyncratic acts in a kind of variety show. And that was the change of everything. But it's a weird, 2004 is just this incredible transition through failure.
I think a lot of people have a similar feeling about their 20s. I certainly do. And sometimes I really berate myself for not starting making my own music younger, and get really irritated and think things would be so different now, la la la, all this kind of pointless, absolutely pointless stuff that I could never know, could never verify or deny. But I think, a friend of mine told me this phrase, it might have been when we were on tour together actually, I might have talked to you about it already, but the idea of composting. So things, ideas can compost within you, or things, sometimes you're just in a composting period. And I feel like most of my 20s was my composting period. And then this richness came out, which was my own solo music. And then it all started to happen as soon as I decided to just make whatever the fuck music I wanted. So I think it's really interesting that you had those years. Yeah, it doesn't seem strange to me that all of those, it's almost like the universe was telling you, literally with shit, that what you were spending your time on hating doing was not for you, and then you made this brilliant decision to start pulling people together. And do you think that the pulling people, all this idiosyncratic art stuff together from all these different people, was you creating the room that you would feel comfortable in?
Well, that was very much what I remember. The first night of doing the show, it was January, and it must have been 2005 or 2004, and I went on stage and I said, right, a lot of people tonight experimenting. They're doing new things and stuff, and it's important that there will be points where you don't really enjoy what's going on stage, but you must remember that it's you that's wrong. And that was the starting point. And the reason that I did that was I'd also seen that within comedy, I mean, it's what we now see, which was more and more it was just about, are they getting laughs? And when I first started going to comedy when I was 15 years old, I was watching these stand-ups in these weird little clubs where it was the excitement of the whole event. And you would allow someone to go off on a tangent and maybe it wouldn't work. And then more and more, and my friend Phil Jays, you know Phil, you've met Phil, and who was running the Scroombly Murder Comedy Clubs, and his brother Peter as well. You know, they would always watch all of the acts. And they would watch all the new acts. And sometimes a new act wouldn't do very well, but they'd book them, give them a paid booking because they knew they had something interesting. And sometimes they'd watch someone who absolutely stormed it, but they weren't really the kind of person they wanted for their room. So they didn't, and then so that was part of a reaction to it, which is I thought, God, comedy's really returned to, if you don't make them laugh, you don't get the correct number of laughs per 20 minutes, you're out of this club and you can't work here anymore. So that was one of the main drives for it. Was just seeing all those, and of course most people didn't fail, and most people were. I still get it now. It's interesting when I do the big shows at Hammersmith and stuff, and the shows that you've done as well with me, and they sometimes people will say, "Why did you book that person? I didn't like them." And I say, did you like that act? They went, yes, I did like that act. And I said, well, the reason is because the first time I put that act on the stage, they didn't work for the audience either. So the only way you can have the night that's as exciting as this is every now and again you're going to see someone that you don't like, and then you're going to see him again. It's like Johnny Vegas. Johnny Vegas, I remember, who in the early days, and I'd seen him up in Manchester, which is the Manchester club circuit was really where it was remarkable to watch. He was incredible, a true force. And then he did a gig down with me in some college in High Wycombe, and they hated him. And they were booing him. It was a night where they'd already thrown an object at the compere and he'd been concussed and fallen off stage. And then Johnny Vegas was standing on a chair singing Ocean Drive by the Lighthouse Family with his trousers around his ankles. And people going, I want my money back. £2 to get in. I want my money back. £2, right? And I thought, and I knew, I said, in a year's time, you're going to be going, oh, God, I saw Johnny Vegas. And 3 months later, he won the Perrier, and then he was on Shooting Stars. And then, but that was a really, and I think that giving people a space to fail, but fail passionately. And I think that was one of the things as well, is all the people that I still work with now. And Josie is one of the best examples of that, which is, sometimes Josie will have a gig where it doesn't necessarily translate to the audience, but it's never due to a lack of passion, a lack of interest, a lack of a wish to connect. And I think that's one of the things I would much rather watch someone fail bravely and excitingly than seeing going, oh God, that acted really well, didn't they? And they did all their lines and they brushed their collar at the same point. They always brushed their collar. They did all those things.
Yeah.
And I think that is a big divide. I mean, I think there's, when you look at some of the big names and I watch them and I go, oh, how can people not see it's all a lie? How can they not see that there's a group of writers that have made up their true life stories? And then, that belief in that this person, that it is real. And the jokes don't have to be real. I don't go, I was watching Tim Vine the other day and I don't think he did go into a garden centre. I don't care about that. But what I mean is that when I watch Tim Vine, or when I watch Bridget Christie, or when I watch Stuart Lee, I know that it comes from a desperate desire to create and to create the best thing.
Yeah. In stand-up, the feedback you get is so immediate. That is terrifying, exhilarating, and horrifying to me all at once, because at least I've got a song's worth of time to take people on a journey, and then they can go, no, it's shit, or, oh, I love that. That changed my life. But yeah, getting that feedback within seconds, rather than 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes, that's really intense. That's really intense. What on earth made you want to do that as a young man?
See, what I was just on your previous point, something that I was thinking about, which was because I used to get very worried when I would introduce you when we were touring together, but not because of you, but because I wanted you to have a great time.
Right.
But I was also aware, and I was always relieved that the audience were like, yeah, this is someone who's doing, songs, and this is fine.
Or they were seated and too polite
No,
talk
but
to each
they
other really
weren't.
to
That
shit.
was the thing that I really noticed, and I noticed that with people who would. I think there was one gig where it was like kind of a bit weird for both of us.
Oh, I remember the one, but I don't want to. I never like slagging off.
No,
towns,
we
but I
won't.
remember which
It's
one you
not.
mean.
No. There was one where we both kind of went, "That was a bit weird," but we both did.
We realised, were they too hot or they were too cold? That there was a temperature problem.
I think they were too hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's normally a lovely place, and I played there, lots of times before, and it just the connection didn't happen, and but yeah, that's always an interest, and I was fascinated because I would just, I'd kind of walk back, introduce you, I'd then go and stand at the bar and watch, and I would like going, I was so worried that there might be people. In the same way as I always feel worried, even now, years and years after I started doing solo shows, I still want to tell people, and I probably sometimes do on stage, I'm really sorry if this is not exactly what you were expecting, because I know that a lot of you have seen a lot of stand-up comedy, and a lot of it has this kind of structure, and it has a lot of jokes in it, and you really know where things are. And some of my most successful gigs have been gigs where... I think, in fact... Oh, no, you weren't there that time. You did the Tobacco Factory with me once, didn't you?
Yeah. I was almost too scared to speak to you that day because I hadn't met you very often.
I know, I'm a terrifying person.
So horrible.
And they're terrifying and rude and horrible. And but the first time that I did Tobacco Factory was the first night of a tour. And I'd literally finished the previous tour 2 days before and been writing this new tour. And it was so ramshackle. And I did that thing where I had 500 slides because they might help remind me things. And it was like a 2.5 hour show.
Yeah.
And I remember kind of walking off and thinking, I hope that was all right for everyone. And it was one of the shows that I had the most reaction afterwards of people wanting to come up and talk and not ask for their money back. Talk and it was, again, because they had clicked into the fact that everything was genuine and it was real and that it wasn't. And that's an interesting thing to me. Sometimes when you work towards what you think is perfection, actually what you're removing are those frayed edges, which are because I've had a few gigs where I've in the interval been going, oh my god, these poor people, I want to apologize, I want to give their money back. I should give their money back now. In fact, I should just walk on and just I'll go to the bank now, and and you get
start handing money out without saying anything.
They're just, we don't want to go, we're having a lovely time, don't be so silly, just take the money, I know you're not having a lovely time. Sometimes I've wanted to, I used to do that. Sometimes I do a gig, and because my inner critic is so loud, and often it deafens any sense of laughter. And I would sometimes write on social media, oh, sorry everyone who came to see it wasn't great tonight. And I get people going, what are you talking about? And then I went, you have to stop doing this because and it is that thing, the Philippa Perry line when Philippa said to me that thing about the problem is we judge everyone else from the outside and we judge ourselves from the inside.
Yes.
And that I think can happen on stage where all you're hearing is someone saying, this is rubbish, you're rubbish, you don't even deserve to have this audience where they won't be coming back to see you. And they're all laughing and having a lovely time.
Yeah, and if you say, sorry, that was shit, you're stealing their experience away, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I had to learn that as well really early on because people would compliment me after a gig. This isn't with my stuff. I have since learned, like, this is one of my first bands at school or something. Someone will give me a compliment. I couldn't take the compliment. I'd explain exactly why the compliment was wrong and where they were wrong at length, and then just be like, okay. And then someone said, all you have to do is say thank you. You don't have to believe it. Don't let it go to your head, but just say thanks because you've given them something. They've had an experience. Don't take that away from them. That's terrible.
It's so stupid, isn't it? It's a weird balance, though, because it's that bit. I think it's the constant fear of appearing to be arrogant, of appearing to think that you're something more than someone else. And I think that is an interesting, because there is a balance. There's definitely a right... there's nothing I enjoy more than watching one of those acts who say, oh, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. You've all been so lovely. I can't wait to come here and see you again. And then seeing the speed in which they're taken out to their car and driven off and all of that kind of stuff. But it is... and anyway, sorry. Yeah.
I think if you're inherently not a dickhead, you probably spend more time worrying about coming across as a dickhead than someone who's just a dickhead and is happy to be so.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when you said about the music industry, because I don't feel I'm part of any industry. It's in the same way as, this weird thing is, make Infinite Monkey Cage, and that's, very successful on the BBC, but I don't get offered anything else by the BBC. And I never, most of the stuff that I ever try and get commissioned doesn't get commissioned. All the stuff, most of the stuff I make goes out on Cosmic Shambles. It's me and my mate Trent, and we just want to make stuff. And you realise you're not in the industry, because in the industry they go, that's a great idea, we want to make that documentary. You go, look, there's no point even bothering to have, because also then you might end up in a world of meetings. And that, it's, again, another thing we both know is that once you get to the industry part of the entertainment industry, there's a lot of meetings and there's a lot of appraisals and there's very little creativity. And that is something that I find so frustrating.
I mean, I really look up to you, to what you and Trent do together and what you do, because you do just make stuff. And I think it's brilliant for people to hear that Robin Ince is not fully endorsed by the BBC. It's not easy for you to do stuff. It's not a breeze or a shoe-in. You actually have to want to do the things you want to do. But that's kind of like why I was trying to quiz you on how do you get these big things done? Because
that was question 1, wasn't it? Yeah, we must get there eventually. Yeah,
I knew it would be like this. Don't worry. It would be so easy for anyone even in the last stage of, or the editing stage of your book, for instance, for that inner critic that's going, no one's going to buy it anyway. Who do you think you are? Blah blah blah. To just go, well, I'm stopping then. But I know you're going to finish that book. So what makes you finish the things? That
is a very myth of Sisyphus thing, isn't it? Why do you keep rolling that boulder up?
Yeah.
It's kind of a... but is it... I think it's... I mean, something we haven't talked about, which you may well have actually talked about in the past. I can't remember, actually, if you have on this before. But that sense that once you at least give yourself permission to make the thing. Yeah. Because I think when you talk right at the beginning about the fact that, for people starting out, how do they start? And I think the most important thing, which, again, I only realised in the last few years, was how many people don't believe they have permission to create anything in the first place.
Exactly.
That it's not part of their world. And, Josie's wonderful, Arts Emergency organisation and all of these different things, which are... And again, I made a, not even a sly dig at Lawrence Fox. One of... the only reason I use him as an example is I think here is... That is an example of someone who doesn't realise what has been handed to them. And instead they're railing against that and pretending, well, my struggles, but just sometimes you got, and I realised that what is handed to me is it is easier to be, straight white male who's gone through an education system which, even though I hated it and, I've fought against it all the time, nevertheless within that there was enough privilege, which is I still thought, well, I can give this a go. I'm going to try. I'm probably going to fail, but I'm going to give it a go, which is probably the right amount of kind of arrogance to have. Because as we know, there are a lot of people who just go, wow, you just don't even realise all the hand-ups you've been given. And it is that old thing of when you sometimes see some of those actors going, actually, it's really hard to be a posh actor nowadays. And, it's been a real battle, actually, for me. And it would be a lot easier if I was a working class woman, I think. And then you go, you're in Hollywood and you've made 5 miniseries and 2 movies and you're 29 years old. I don't think it's been a battle. I remember hearing that from some comics years and years ago, talking about how much harder it was for them as 2 white male. And I thought, oh my God, look at the interviews with people in the 1950s who spent their whole life in the working men's clubs, and then at the age of 62, they finally got on television, and then 2 years later, they died of a heart attack. There is that bit of... Sorry, that's going off. But no, the permission thing, the positive side of it, which I think is a really important. And so now I have just gone, now I've reached that point, which is I'm not thinking of a market. I'm just thinking, I mean, the book club really was that point of me going, what would I like to exist? What do I think would be fun? What were the shows that I loved when I was 15? Well, let's see who are the people who can now create a 21st century, that kind of thing. And I think that was it was an interesting thing, because some of the older comics that I had seen when I was a kid started to come to the show. And they went, this is really exciting because we've not seen something like this for a while. Yeah. And so I think that is, from that point onwards, it's like, just make it. Yeah, we did that we did a documentary about the physicist Richard Feynman. We had a word with the BBC, said it's the 100th anniversary of his birth, and no one seemed that interested. So we just went, well, let's just make it.
Yeah.
And more often than not, with the stuff that I do with Trent, we don't really make money on it. We make enough to keep making more stuff. We would like to make more, we would like to eventually, because I think, on an average week, especially with like the big show that we're doing soon, which will probably have happened by the time this goes out, but the 24-hour show, that is Trent at the moment is working pretty much 5 days a week on that.
Yeah.
And I think it is that bit of the drive to, because there are times when I go, why don't I just stop doing all these things? Why don't I'll just do some gigs and I'll do stuff that pays me money, and there's some corporate gigs that I get, and I'll just do some of those things. And then that's when I realised, it's not about that. Because I tried taking a day off and it's really hard. I genuinely, I found during the early part of
laughing
lockdown.
because I'm terrible at it.
Yeah, you're not, but you just want to create, don't you, all the time? As far as I look at what you put up, and that's because like when I was doing Pointless with Josie, there was one of the questions the producer asked was and Alexander was wondering what are your hobbies? I said I don't have a hobby. Because this is my hobby. This is my everything. Yeah. My everything is writing and coming up with ideas and trying to do documentaries and interview lots of people and all of that. So there's not a job and then time off. And I found the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, I immediately wanted to start making things. So, you did a daily morning show at 10 every morning live, just because we knew some people would feel kind of, a little bit disconnected. And indeed, a lot of performers would feel disconnected as well. Like, what are we going to do? And then every now and again, I'd get really like kind of annoying headaches, not migraine headaches, but those kind of headaches that mean it's very hard to get any process going on in your skull. And I would always find they would go away if I then did some writing or made something. And it actually turns out that if I don't do anything, if I don't feel that I've made anything in a day, it starts to give me some form of physical illness, which is probably not healthy.
Probably not. But at least you can keep it away by doing stuff.
Yeah.
At least you've got a solution to that.
But I'm still glad. I don't mind. I'd rather have it that than go, I didn't do anything today and it was fine. That guilt, like I found during lockdown, I get up earlier than any other time because I'm like, no, you've got to get up earlier. You've got to set your alarm for 7 a.m. Start doing things because you haven't got the excuse that you were doing a late night gig. By the way, I'm just going to turn the light on because it's got very dark in here. I was wondering
why you're sitting in the dark. I thought
it's just a kind of an effect that we, artistic effect.
Man in a cave effect.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So, just a little bit more on permissions, because I think that's really interesting. I don't know if people might call it kind of labeling something, because I need that. I need to say to myself, I am making an album, and then I do all the things, little things every day that lead towards an album being made, because otherwise that's not going to happen very quickly. The last one took 18 months, from start to finish. It wouldn't have happened in a week had I written on my to-do list, make album, it's done. It doesn't happen without my input. So is it similar for you? Do you go, I am now writing a book, I am now writing a show, I am doing this? No,
I don't mean it like that, actually. I think I've now reached the stage where the permission's done now. Just make something, and if I don't get, if after this book comes out, no publisher wants another book by me, I'll write one anyway.
Yeah.
And I'll put it out some way because we can do all those things, But I mean, at that first point, when I think there's lots of people for lots of different reasons who just feel that this is not an option for them. There's a lovely thing in Lem Sisay's fantastic book, My Name Is Why. He found out quite early on that the stage was a place for him. There was a point, I think, where he was brought up on stage. I think it was a pantomime, like Lenny Henry or something like that. That brought him up on stage at Blackpool. I think it might not be Blackpool, but and he, and for Lem, when you see his work, I mean, he is another one, I think, where you go, the work is a necessity.
Definitely.
And then there's other. I was talking to a guy called Alam Shahar, who wrote a wonderful book called The Young Atheist Handbook. It's a very beautiful book, actually, and he's a science teacher, and he was brought up in a part of London in a Bangladeshi family where it was a very racist part of London, where he very much believed that it was a white world and that he was second or third class, and he kind of wanted to be. He thought writing was his thing, but he never really got encouraged by his English teacher. So when he did well, wrote a story and it did really well, they didn't say. But his science teacher, and he didn't think that he was a sciencey kind of person. When he did an experiment or he did something, that they were like, "That is so good, Alan. That is really." And they were the ones who slowly, or maybe even quite, were like, "Oh, I'm allowed to do this." And I can do
Right.
this. And he became a fantastic, he's done other things as well, but fantastic science teacher. There's a lot of his stuff online of him doing experiments. And he has that way now of connecting with lots of different people who may well never do particularly well at science, but they won't be bored during his lessons. They'll be interested. And I think, that is an example, I would say, in terms of permission, which is, by encouragement, by someone saying, you're allowed to do this. I'm not from the, the background, I'm not from the, this is not the place where I'm not someone who is allowed to become that thing. And of course there's that's the bit that's still not understood by so many. I mean, I know it's we've gone through this kind of sudden spike of change, which hope doesn't change necessarily, where people like me will say things in the press was really bloody hard for me now, even though still remain dominant, turn on your television, but that and that's. And I think it's interesting to think how long that's been coming, much longer than you might. It's like there was a point with kind of women in comedy where I remember Jo Caulfield one year. I think it was Jo. She was the only woman in Edinburgh doing a solo show. And this was within this century, I think. I think it would have been about 2001. And then there was suddenly a point where you were just seeing just an incredible, and these are all the best shows because also they're, all the voices which feel, even though they've been there forever, they feel like new voices, all of that stuff. And then that changed for a lot of people because obviously the more, but in Infinite Monkey Cage, there's a few series where you think, bloody hell, we had a lot of, male scientists and not much else on. And I think there was one series where we just had someone playing the banjo was the only female guest pretty much. And that was the series where I went, we really have to try harder. This is terrible. Yeah. And then from
people are there.
And from that series onwards, that it changed.
Yeah.
And it was, but it was just suddenly going, this is really terrible. How have we allowed this to happen? And there was no deliberate thing. Everyone else involved in the show, apart from Brian and me, is female as well. Our long-time producer, Sash, more than long-time producer, she's the third part of the creative team, very much. And she, it wasn't thought of. It wasn't an issue. And that's part of the permission thing, isn't it? Is the moment you see someone on stage who is somehow got part of your story in them as well.
It's life-changing seeing that. Some of the best gigs I feel I've ever done were when there was this one where there was very few people there. It was at a festival, but there were really young girls watching and, looking up at the stage. I was there with my band, female bass player, female backing vocalist, me, and two guys. And I just thought, this is what I want them to see, to go, oh, I could do that if I wanted. I might not want to, but if I want to, there's nothing in my way. Because I was never given permission by music teachers or anything. My music teachers wanted to stop me playing in a band because they wanted me to concentrate on playing my violin, which I was fairly fucking rubbish at, to be honest. So I really am glad I ignored them and just went and started a band because I'd always wanted to. I was a very shy person as a teenager, very, very shy, would never sing in front of anyone. And then finally got the guts up to sort of, pull some people together and started this band. And that gave me just a whole new world. I'd always known I wanted to write songs, but I didn't really know what they were or who wrote them or how you did it or anything. And it was just inside me from when I was really, really young. I did A-level music, but I got a D because it was all not the sort of thing I was very good at. And never went to music college, never really hung out with musicians. So, no one's giving me permission. So I think one of the things that drives me to try and say to people, you can do the thing you want, is because no one told me I could. So I feel it took me longer. But because of that composting idea, I try to think that time wasn't wasted because it led me to be who I am now, and I'm happy with who I am now, so that's okay. I love the fact that you do just make stuff and that you would, if you wanted to write a book and no one wanted to put it out for you, you would put it out. That's brilliant because that's exactly what I'm like. It makes me feel less nuts to speak to you, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I think it is. I think it is innate in without wishing to get into the nature nurture debate. Should any geneticists be listening? But I do think there is something about that kind of that just having to create things. That a holiday is not. You might get to a point like I like that. There's a certain level of exhaustion where, like, Christmas would be a good example. Christmas normally the rule is I take Christmas Day off. Probably Boxing Day too, sir. And then always the day after Boxing Day, I come up with some idea that will be made in the next year. There's that, that's where book club began. Book club, I'd have been thinking about it, and then suddenly I was bored. And I'm always bored. The third day of Christmas is when I go, I've just got an idea. And so I think, 2 days is fine. And I think it's a lovely thing as well. And I wish more people, I do think that there's one of the big problems is also the fear that what we were talking about near the beginning, the fear that it's not good enough. But you have to put out the thing that's not good enough to then have the thing that eventually becomes all right. That's all right.
Yeah.
And then the next one will be more, that's all right as well. And then they'll keep improving. Yeah. But you have to, it's a terrible thing, but you have to take that. But the main thing is, especially if you're writing, if what you do is personal, and I think with something like music, it kind of is, even if you were, but it's certainly what you do and what most musicians I like. There is a level that it's personal, even if the songs aren't particularly revelatory about that individual. There is a personal thing. Right. And with comedy, when you see comedy that is clearly the person not playing a character. Yeah. A lot of the gag people and a lot of the people who employ writers to write their observational comedy, you're seeing a performance. Yeah, you're not necessarily seeing the person.
It's like a cover version.
Yeah, it kind of is. And then the moment that you then also, of course, have the extra risk, which is, should someone hate you, they haven't merely hated your jokes. Or they haven't just hated those songs that you wrote for no apparent reason. Yeah. Or they haven't just hated that book that you wrote because you were told that romance thrillers were the right kind of thing to write. They've hated something which is part of you. Yeah. And overcoming that is a really major thing, I think, to go, okay, this is a bit here. And that was another thing. I would say that was part of, again, that show with the exploding melon thing. That was a point of honesty, which I'd probably not had before, even though I didn't necessarily realise it at the time. And then everything kind of opens up from them.
And that's what speaks to people. Did Vernon Kay ever hear about this? And if so, did he have a problem with you punching his head in?
Well, it's weird because Vernon and me used to go to a lot of the same bars, and no, we didn't. Imagine me hanging around with Vernon Kay, and it was based on a true story, right? It was based on the fact that the last TV warm up gig that I did, because I used to do a lot of TV warm up, which is a weird thing, where you just have to go on between all the camera breaks. I used to do things like 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps and things like that, which was always a really long record as well, because there'd be lots of different setups and stuff like that. And I was doing this quiz show that Vernon Kay was presenting for early evening BBC Two, and tiny little audience. And I was kind of, hey, where are you from? What do you do? Hey, where'd you from? And then he made a snide comment about me when he came on. And it's the only person who ever did that. Never had that from anyone else. Always got on with her. The interesting was then he was really different afterwards, because I knew all the panellists because they were friends from various different kind of, including Claudia Winkleman and stuff like that. Right. And then he was like, oh, hang on, he knows these all the famous people as well. But so it was me basically explaining, because about halfway through the show, I'd suddenly get all angry and go, because Vernon Kay, and I was trying hard and everything. Vernon, he made a very and I don't know if anyone here's been slighted by Vernon Kay, but one of the things you can do if you've been slighted by Vernon Kay is you just get like a melon and you draw his face on it there, just rough version of his face, and then preferably in the summer, and then you just leave it out on your windowsill in the summer, and then you just kind of watch it, rotting and decaying and just turning into just kind of melony shit, just watching that, it's just a way of kind of, just helps you through a slight from Vernon Kay. And then half an hour later, when I would suddenly have this emotional breakdown, then I would pick up this melon I would make and I would just punch it and punch it and punch it. And I would always get one that wasn't ripe, so I'd have to really punch it till it exploded. I would then stop still and start singing Mustang Sally, right? And the pinnacle of my artistic achievement. And but yeah, I don't think Vernon Kay ever heard about that. I wish I could do that show again. I wish it was, because
I wish you could too.
The bits I liked doing in it, I really loved doing in it. It was a half-assed thing. I got it right. I mean, this was another of my mistakes, is because I like making so many things. So many of them can end up being half-assed. And in Edinburgh, you can't afford to have that. That was an interesting change to watch, actually, in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which was, it used to be that you'd go up and no one was previewing for a year beforehand.
No.
People would go up with slightly rough things, develop them, and then at the last 10 days of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, it'd be great, But it would be now that fear, that constant fear of, oh my God, there's going to be critics in tonight, and maybe there's going to be someone from Mock the Week, and I don't know. I think that can have a very negative effect on creativity, because you constantly... I certainly found... I remember one of the big changes for me was the first few Edinburghs I did in normal venues, fancy schmancy venues. And after the show, I would actually have my fingers in my ears, be singing with myself to make sure I couldn't hear what any of the audience said when they were coming out, in case they hadn't been satisfied. And then I started to do the free fringe, where you end up holding a bucket afterwards and people just put money in. And that was a big change. Was I suddenly went, I don't want to charge people 15 quid to come and see the show. I'm going to do the free fringe, and then they can pay what they want, and I probably won't make as much money, but I can just do what I want. And that was another, that bit where you go, just do the thing. And and that was a huge, I would say, book club, and then a few years later doing the free fringe were transitionary things for me.
Now, we could talk for many hours, and we have done in the past, but I think I might try to wrap up, because you really do have work to do today.
Yeah, I've still got another 2,000 words to get rid of today.
Just Control-Alt-Delete, you'll be fine. I was wondering if you would be interested in talking about how 2020 has affected you in terms of, emotionally affected you in terms of gigging and things, because you were on the road a lot before this.
It's an odd, because I think now in December the frustration has kicked in. I think that I found, again, that bit of immediately kind of descending into busyness kept the momentum up, and I think I was making enough stuff, and I think now I feel that I've run out of different ways of making things. So it's like each time they think, what else can we make? Oh, there's this kind of sciencey series. What else can we make? Oh, I know. I'm going to make a documentary series about my favourite kind of cult films and weird books and stuff like that. And that, which we're doing now, but I've now found the pattern of how to do that. So I'm really enjoying making it, but I now need another thing that I don't know how to do to start making. But I have found now that when I watch movies and stuff, like I was watching a movie set in Toronto yesterday, and I was looking at it going, I went to Toronto last year, and this is what I used to do. And if I see Manchester, I think normally I go to Manchester 10 times a year to do gigs. I was just thinking about things like, tiny things like not tiny, but, going up to Northampton, where I go quite often. And so I now feel that there is, what I found the easiest thing was to never open the diary, because for the first few weeks when we didn't know how long it was going to last, you would open your diary and cross that out and cross that out and cross that out. And then it had gone on for long enough that I'd open my diary and I'd go, oh yeah, I was meant to be doing that festival in Bulgaria next week. And at this point now, I'm meant to be at Hebden Bridge. And then I was going to, all of those things. So it's not been, I've also been extremely fortunate in the fact that last year was an incredibly busy year. So I had, it's like I have savings, and that makes a huge, that's one of the things. There's a big difference between being an artist who's got a bit in the bank and an artist who is, as many people are, just working immediately from, this week I've got my 5 gigs in a pub and this is what I take home. I was amazed. I was reading a friend of mine on Facebook was talking about, in terms of support for Scottish artists. I don't know if today was an anniversary of either Robbie Burns' birth or death, but he just happened to write about the fact that he said, this was, one of the reasons that he died so young was he had to work so hard. And, that placed him in situations which would have built up ultimately to, the decline in health. And then he just mentioned the Scottish artist Alistair Gray, who wrote a fantastic book called Lanark, which is a very famous book, and a brilliant artist and wrote many things. And he just said, he was on about 12,000 a year towards the end of his life. And you do realise that how little people... So I've been in a fortunate position. Yeah. And so it's not, I've not had but I did find over the summer not going to the festivals was one of, I was really looking forward to Beautiful Days, and that's such a lovely festival, and, not having Glastonbury and not having there were certain events. So I haven't minded not, and I think, again, I was very lucky because I toured so much last year. I mean, not only I toured with you, I did a tour before that on my own. I did over 100 dates with Brian Cox where we were traveling around, you know, and then lots of the other little weird gigs or strange festivals I get asked to do. So almost the whole year was away working. So for the first few months, it's kind of fine.
Yeah.
I think when it comes back, that first moment will be terrifying.
Yeah.
And because the nearest I've had is doing things like I was saying, because I've done things like Mastermind and stuff like that, I think the adrenaline becomes overbearing almost.
Right.
It's so much because you're not used to going out in front of anything or anyone. I've been so much in my house, just writing in my little attic and doing Zoom things in my little attic. And suddenly this is... so I think that first gig back, people are going to be... And I think the audience, it will be really interesting to see about. I hope I'm gigging reasonably early on. I hope there's something that I do on kind of the first because on the 24-hour show, which has either just happened or is just about to happen. We will have a small audience, so that's the nearest we've got to playing. But of course, the socially distanced audience, and I would imagine people aren't buying tickets for the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. session.
Probably not.
No, it's probably not happening.
I spoke to Frank Turner earlier in the series, and he was talking about the sort of 9 o'clock, I can't remember what he called it now, 9 o'clock itch or shakes or something. So the time that you think you're supposed to be on stage, 9 p.m., for instance, or 8 p.m. in your case. Did you feel any of that? Like,
I always feel that
stuff.
Yeah, 7 p.m. Till about 9 is when I would. It's kind of finally almost gone now after whatever it is, 9 months. But always when I've taken any time off, I had a few days in between tours or things like that. That's when I'm most volubly mumbling to myself, doing stupid voices, and the shake is there. And that doesn't go away. And there's a bit where, one of the knees is doing that jiggling up and down thing because all the adrenaline is in a single knee.
Yeah. Well, because the body gets used to doing certain things at certain times, doesn't it?
Well, I think if I didn't get it, it would mean that I would obviously been lazy. Because I think now as well, after 20 whatever years, nearly 30 years, it's just the expectation that I need now to get my fight or flight response.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever miss Reading services like I do?
That is one of those things, isn't it? There's certain, and there is that delight where you sometimes walk into that bit where you get a clash of gigs. And you, I'm sure you've had that where you bump into a band that because they're coming from another. Yes, I do miss those things.
I had this funny moment because for the most part, I have been fine with not gigging. I just want to be safe. I want everyone to be safe. I do not want to be the reason that people are leaving their homes in this climate. So I'm fine with all that. And I don't gig so much that I would get that 9 o'clock shake thing at all. So it's fine. But there was this weird moment a few weeks ago where I was like, I really kind of miss walking into Reading services at 1 a.m. with like makeup smeared all over my face, looking quite weird. Getting a donut and a black coffee to see me home to Bristol on the drive, trying to stay awake, blasting The Prodigy, windows open kind of thing. And I don't really love that sort of driving, but I did have a moment of just like, where's my Krispy Kreme and coffee and crisp dinner and all that sort of stuff? The most unhealthy parts of touring. But it's been a very weird year. I
mean, a lot of the fun of gigs is not necessarily the gigs themselves, is it? No. I mean, sometimes it's a nightmare, and I don't miss the amount of travelling. I don't miss the number of times I've been on a train to the West Country, standing up on a Friday by the toilet and all of that kind of thing. No. But I think it has changed the way that we, in terms of when you're socially with people, when you do sometimes meet people, and then you go, I don't know how to communicate. And I've just allowed out of my, I've practiced quite a lot, even though you wouldn't believe this, to try and not say the really weird things that are in my head when first meeting the person who's doing the sound or the lights or whatever.
Yeah.
And now on the few occasions when I have gone into kind of production environments, I've thought, that was the wrong thing to say first. That means I'm really weird now.
I'm having longer conversations with the postman, I must say.
That is the odd thing. Again, Josie, who obviously I normally see a lot in a year.
Yeah.
And last week was the first time when we went off to do Pointless Celebrities that we'd seen each other. And even on the show, you have a piece of perspex between the two of you. All this kind of thing. And it did feel odd that we were at a distance in masks.
Yeah.
It was,
of course.
yeah.
It is odd.
It felt.
It's okay to admit that that's odd.
But it's like with a lot of people, it doesn't. But when it's with
Right.
people that you work with a lot, overall it's fine. But every now and again there is that big, oh yeah, we have to. Oh no, I've got to move back a bit now because you moved before it, and back and forth.
Yeah.
All that kind of that push me pull you system.
Yeah. Weird. I'm glad that some things can go on. Are you allowed to talk about Mastermind, or is that a big secret?
It comes out at Christmas, and my specialist subject, a very good Bristol subject, I should add, is the young ones. That wasn't the first subject that I was going to do, and then eventually we had to have a long conversation, and it got whittled down to the young ones. I went, all right, I'll do that then.
Brilliant.
So I basically watched episodes of the young ones. I watched every one probably 20 times before to do that, and so wound up, so nervous. I was on with Grace Dent, Waxy from Blue Peter, and Joe Pasquale, and so I felt under extra pressure, of course, because Stuart Lee's done a whole routine about Joe Pasquale, but I can't say any more than that. But it was absolutely exciting. But it was very odd. It was very odd to, I had to go to an airport, I had to get on a plane, I had to go to Belfast, all of those things. And thinking, God, this is the kind of thing that I used to do every day. But it is, it's the most, and then it's very funny because all of John Humphrey's chats with everyone are basically, but it was better in the old days, wasn't it? So that was...
Yeah, but it definitely was better in the old days before 2020, I would say. I think we can all agree on that.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. On that note, what pieces of your work should people listening to this go and check out so they know who on earth this is they've listened to? Probably
I did a talking book version of I'm a Joke and So Are You, and obviously there's the book version of that, and I think that is and then obviously I'll be back soon doing Infinite Monkey Cage with Brian. That's going to be back on, and all of the podcasts that we do, the book Shambles and stuff like that.
So just everything.
Well, I mean, the book I'm a Joke and So You, which was a real nightmare to write. I mean, that was the most difficult thing that I've probably done in the last 5 years. I think so. Yeah, it was. No, it was actually, because it made me so angry and annoyed, and I spent a month being furious with it, and really at one point I wanted just to give the publisher back their advance and just say, look, I don't want to I obviously don't have this book in me, I'm not going to be able to do it, and let's just give up on this. And then of course later on there's the battle with the editor where you go, but I think this is important, and okay, blah, blah. And I won some battles, I lost others. Some of the battles that I lost, I was right, he was right that I should have lost them. But I think in the end, it's opened up the most interesting conversations for me, I suppose, over time. And it's such an odd thing where, because I wanted to cut out all the stuff that was kind of about me, because I know those stories and they're boring. And so that's an interesting thing where the editor went, no, this story is a good story to have in here. And you go, is it? And
they're beautiful stories. They're really moving stories.
Oh, thank you.
I think it was page 2 or 3 that made me go, oh, that's why I'm doing this. So you don't even have to read that far into it. Just read the first few pages and then that's it.
That's the interesting for me, again, in the process of writing the book, was going, oh, what age was I then? 48 writing that, and going, oh, like I actually had that moment of writing it and going, oh, this is why this has all happened. This is why my whole life is this. This is why I need to do that. And it's an intriguing thing to, I mean, in a very different way, Alan Davis has written a very good and sad book about the rather terrible things that happened in his childhood. But I found it near the beginning of the book. He talks about the past and he says, it's always traveling with you. And I thought that's a very good thing, a very good point to make as well, which is, and I think it is. I know I talked about it, I think, on the tour with you, but that bit where sometimes you have to get a certain distance from events, and it might be years from that event for the event itself to come into focus, and for you to realise that.
It's so weird. It's been happening to me all year. One of the things happened through a song, and the other thing happened through starting to think about writing a book about my life, and then having a major epiphany about something. Dun, dun, dun. Not going to tell you next week either, but it's just something that happened, like these two giant things that took me right back to teenagerdom and sort of beyond that. and made a lot of things fall into place and make sense. And I don't know what it was that prompted these particular things now, many years later. But yeah, it's it is always with you. It's interesting. I'm reading Pete Paphides' book at the moment. Have you read that, Broken Greek?
No, I've not read that yet.
He writes so beautifully about this as well, about how I can't quote it because I can't remember, but it's really good. You should definitely read it. It's great. Very beautifully put and a really interesting life. So yeah, books are good, aren't they?
It's an interesting thing, I think, where some creative people, and I mean all people, not just but I'm thinking in particular, which is I know people who are terrified of in any way interrogating some of the things which may well be the gloomier moments of the past, for fear that it will stop them being able to create.
Oh,
and
that's
I think, and I don't think that I actually think it's an alibi. Because it's too late, as we know, because it doesn't actually matter if anyone's had therapy or anything like that. You know, many people deal with a lot of that, and you might be able to get things in sharper focus, but still most of the things that it doesn't mean that you'll lose anything by understanding yourself more.
No, I think it's definitely a good thing. I wrote a song about that though, because it's called Ghosts and Shadows, and I wanted to have, I think I should have had this bereavement therapy. I was trying to get on the NHS many years ago, and I went to a session and then I was actually genuinely ill and couldn't go to the other ones, and then they basically said, well, that's your chance gone, really. And then I wrote this song sort of justifying to myself the reasons for not talking through this stuff, because I didn't want to make everything that had happened just be okay, because the stuff wasn't okay. And then I realised many years later, well, of course it's not okay, and having therapy just would have made me be able to deal with it better. It doesn't mean I could never have written songs about things that are important or sad and things. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's okay to understand yourself more.
What a terrible idea it would be, wouldn't it, that all art came from your refusal to in any way become happier. You know, or
that's the myth, isn't it? That's the rock and roll myth, isn't it? You have to be a degenerate. You have to be drinking all the time. You have to, it's indulging any kind of vices, and then just being horrible to everyone, trashing dressing rooms, throwing TVs out the window, apparently, being rude to everyone you meet, and then you'll be the most successful one. Is that really, a blueprint for a happy and balanced life? It's not what I want.
What a pity you didn't actually have your guitar like on you, because that bit when you go, I actually wrote a song about that, and then you went straight into it and go, wow, the whole show has actually been just a build up to you.
Just an excuse.
Yeah. Still doesn't mention anything I've written a song about. This has taken a lot longer than I'd hoped.
What's your next creative adventure, Robin Ince?
That's different. Well, do you know what? It does feel like an adventure to, once I've got the book done, actually working out the next stuff that I'm going to do for the next Brian Cox tour, because it's so different to the environment that I'm in when, normally touring, actually playing these kind of arenas and stuff like that. So I'm thinking very hard about that. And so in one way, it's not the biggest thing in terms of the amount that it will leave behind in terms of the size of a book or the length of a solo show, but finding the right kind of half an hour or so that I will use within that show. Because I'm going to find it very hard, because last time we did a show, about 6 months before we started the tour, maybe a little bit more, we were doing a show and I said, look, Brian, I've written this poem and I'm going to stick it in my section of the show because I think it's going to fit in with what we're going to do. And he saw it and he really liked the poem, and it ended up becoming the kind of almost the end of the show. So in the tour show, I'd come on and interrupt him. Then I did a bit of stand-up in the second half. Then we did a bit more stuff in the second half. And then at the end, I'd read this poem about the passing of time and love and all of these things. And then Brian would just kind of come on and sum up what had been seen, and that was it. And it worked, and it was like, and it does feel now like last time we had the perfect structure that was needed. And, Brian could say, it's all right, I'll do the science, and you just write another poem that's filled with melancholy, and go, it won't work again. That's the thing is, when you afterwards you go, that was the perfect way for us to combine what he does so brilliantly, and for me to have some point of my existence within the show, and it does worry me thinking, what am I going to come up? That bit. It's like whenever you finish. I'm sure, I don't know if you have that when you finish an album. Do you then go, I don't know if I've got any more songs left in me?
Oh yeah, always, yeah.
Yeah.
I always feel like that. And then it happens, and then I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I'm good at. And then I listen back to it when it's finished and go, how on earth did I do that? So I actually have a notebook on my desk where I write every single time I'm writing a song. I explain to myself how I did it. So I can read back and go, oh, okay, I can do that again. Like a little blueprint.
It's funny, those that you never get. Two things I've never learned. One is, do you know what? It is enough stuff you've got. This will definitely fill 2 hours. This is definitely long enough to be a book. This is, I've never learned, every book's been 60,000 words too long or more. Every show has been 2.5 hours when it's booked for 60 minutes, all of those things. But every single time I go, but this time, oh my God, it's going to be nothing.
Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to me on my podcast.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.
The reason it took me a while to invite you is because I wanted to practice a lot first. Because you do this all the time. I wanted to make sure I didn't suck.
Yeah.
Was it all right?
Who cancelled?
Okay?
Who cancelled? It was great. It's fun.
Good.
No, it's nice. It was like, it was better than that time that we would listen, on that one of the car journey. Well, actually, I won't say that about the.
Oh God, we listened to 3 podcasts in a row. Like
which
the
all
beginnings
had
put us off
20
so much.
minutes at the beginning, which was just saying, buy my things, buy my things, buy my things, buy my things.
Ads, or I'm so great. You should be so lucky to listen to this. Oh.
Because I literally every now and again on our Cosmic Shambles thing, especially because this year we've not been able to tour or do any of the things we would normally do to money, I literally just say, oh, by the way, if you can support us for our Patreon, that's really great. And some people written in going, oh, I wish they'd stop going on about wanting money for this. You go, have you ever listened to a podcast? That was under 5 seconds of begging. It was a nonchalant one. It even included, and don't worry if you can't, there's always stuff we make for free and accessible to everyone. But those ones were just...
And there's one particular series that, because when I was researching other people's podcasts specifically, so I would start making my own one, I was talking to you about it as well. I listened to loads of different ones and looked at how long the ads were at the beginning. 8 minutes! One of them was 8 minutes of ads before a single word was said about anything else. So I'm really glad we had that conversation in Canterbury, you and Trent, and I was asking your opinions on it. And I just haven't done the ad thing. Any ads in this are only just to point people towards my music, because if I didn't mention it, you wouldn't know about it.
Yeah.
I can't assume that everyone will be so enamored of me after listening to me once that they're going to check out everything I've done in my life. Of course not. Of course I'm going to point people towards things, but that's all. No bank ads, no nothing, just nothing.
Also, there is that thing which I think we can get. You have to tell people, because they genuinely don't know there's a path to anywhere else if you don't. So if you don't say I do, if someone just happens to listen to this because they want to hear, Mark the Levelers, whatever it might be, then they might not know about all the stuff that you produce. And I find that really interesting, which is people can get very worried about, because again, when I was going around doing the publicity for the book, and I went on that Andrew Neil show on a Thursday night.
Okay.
And I think the bit that I did had a few 100,000 people watched it online and stuff, a little bit that I did. But it didn't sell any books, because the one that I thought I'd been asked on so I could talk about my book, or at least say something about it, there was no place to mention it. So all they've seen is just someone talking. And they might have enjoyed that someone talking, but they know nothing about the fact that that's someone talking. No one goes, oh, there's a guy talking. He might have written a book. Has the guy talking written a book? That's not going to happen.
No, of course not. Look, you've got stuff to do.
Yeah, that's this podcast's taken so long. That's 100,000 words I could have taken out of the book by now.
Well, I will say thank you again very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
After a really tough year, I really needed that conversation, and I hope it helped you too. Thanks so much to Robin for sharing his wisdom and silliness with us. As always, I've created a special page on my website with links to Robin's work, so head to penfriend.rocks/Robin for that. The 9 Lessons 24 Encore is this Saturday night, the 19th of December, and I'll be making a short appearance myself. To join us, just head to cosmicshambles.com/9lessons. In keeping with what Robin was saying about making sure we tell people what we do so that they know, I'll just remind you that I have my own version of a Patreon site called The Correspondence Club, and this is what powers the making of all my music and podcasts. If you're interested in being welcomed into our friendly online community, visit penfriend.rocks/join to browse free and paid tiers and choose your member perks. Everyone who signs up to my mailing list also gets 2 free songs, so come and pay me a visit sometime. I'll be back in January to share more conversations with inspiring artists, so please make sure you subscribe to this series, consider leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, and most importantly, take care of yourself. Speak soon, lots of love.